Hello everyone, I'm Varnika, Senior Research Analyst at Twimbit. Welcome to our panel discussion on SME banking, understanding the market players who are focused on SMEs. So today, yet again, I'm super thrilled to welcome Kunal and Shelly with me to talk about SME-focused market players. So welcome Shelly and Kunal.
Hey, Varnika.
Hi there.
Thank you. So I will quickly introduce both of them. So Shelly is Vice President Operations for a Fintech company called Shubloan in India, and she has over 20 years of banking experience. While we have Kunal, who also has over 10 years of banking experience and contributes in product management, development, innovation, and strategy, and is also a senior business leader at a product company based in UK. So to set the context here, in today's discussion, we actually concluded that there are three key reasons why SME is unable to secure a credit, which is more likely towards information crisis, identity crisis, and a digital crisis. However, there are players in the market in Asia-Pacific countries who are trying to solve these challenges and efficiently are able to meet and serve the needs of the SME. So to begin with, my first question would be, guys, whom do you think are those market players who are trying to offset these challenges and able to meet the needs of the SME customers?
So I'll go first on that one then. So I think, as we discussed on the last conversation that we had, we kind of split the groups into different camps ultimately. Right. But I think from my perspective, there are two key players really that will end up ultimately moving ahead with trying to sort of take on that funding gap that exists right now. So you've still got the incumbent banks. I don't think we can wholly dismiss them in that sense. Yeah. So I think what the incumbent banks are doing now, they've realized that they've been a barrier to a certain degree in terms of trying to help SMEs out from a funding standpoint. And I think what they're trying to do is one of two things. Look at how they can, change the approach that they've had historically with trying to work with these types of businesses. So, for example, UOB in Singapore, they've certainly stepped up to the challenge in terms of what can they do from an SME banking perspective to better that relationship or that perception of what an incumbent bank, would go about trying to manage that whole process. So they've looked at their approach and how they can tackle some of the impediments that stopped them before, and banks of that size in the past certainly. They're one I can single out from my experiences. The others, of course, we mentioned yesterday, the tech companies. So I mentioned Grab. The Grab Financial Group are looking to break into this arena themselves. And there are a couple of others in Singapore. So you've got people like Genfi and Aspire, who are up-and-coming lending organizations looking to offer a different approach to SME lending in that sense compared to traditional methods. And in the Philippines, there's a company that I know called First Circle, who are trying to take on a similar method as well. So I think you're going to end up with a mixture of different players, but typically they'll either be incumbent banks or these fintech companies. But I think it'll be a combination of both, incumbent bank and these smaller fintech companies teaming up together ultimately from a collaboration standpoint. So that's how I see it. That's my viewpoint, certainly in Asia Pacific.
Interesting. And what do you think, Shelly? Do you also agree with there's going to be like an amalgamation of fintech and incumbent banks, and who would be your top picks as players?
Yes. So to continue with what Kunal has said, completely agree to that. It's a kind of joint collaboration with everything when we talk about the tech players and we talk about the e-commerce players and Grab we mentioned. So most of the names he has taken. So what my viewpoint is, it's about the platforms. So we may not clearly call them fintechs. Those may be, like we discussed in previous episode, that these may be telecom players, these may be e-commerce platforms. It's about where the SMEs are coming to transact. So, and who are the owner of that data. So with the help of that, I think those institutions are lending. Also, a key point to that, the differentiation would be the unique model. So if you see some names he has mentioned, then we have Genefi, which have a third party a lending. It's an equity stake where the people are having the sure return, and so those kind of different models who's bringing in, and sustainability of those models, how it works. I think those people will sustain. So if we talk about WeBank for China, so right. So supported by Alipay and the great technology they are coming up with, the deep pockets. I think they have more solutions to offer. But on the top of that, how those solutions get customized to the problem statement, right? So what SMEs need, like we understood the digital literacy. But if they are bringing a product without without putting an analytic approach to identifying those product fit, as we discussed in the last episode, I think that will play a role. Other than only, so we are bringing SMEs from the traditional banking NBFCs to Fintech, and now the next level would be bringing from Fintech to the point of sale. And I think I would like to quote the unique model which is now coming up greatly is the pay now and pay later. So buy now and pay later, right? So that approach is adopted by many players, and that is working. So that's how I think like it's moving on to next level now.
So if we talk about the incumbent banks, what do you think? So like how Kunal mentioned, his top one would be UOB doing really well in Singapore. And I totally agree. Their business model is very unique, and their digital transformation journey for SMEs has been extremely interesting because they offer from lending to accounting management, payroll, business reconciliation, so on and so forth. But if we had to pick somebody from maybe India, what do you think was going to be a top player?
The banking side, I think they in India, if you in India context, I would say they play with the diversification of products, and they are not able to focus on that specialization.
Right.
So I can't quote any single player who's doing outstanding in the SME. We discussed that Indian banking system is struggling in terms of identifying the cost proposition in terms of financing a MSME, especially where the cost and risk is very high, and the NPA percentage is again crossing 8 to 9%. So I think that problem statement is yet to solve. And India context, I think that partnerships would greatly solve that problem for the banks.
Right. So I also understand that there are standalone players which are coming. So if I see Australia, which is purely dominated by the top 4 banks, as they call themselves, and then there is a player like Judo Bank who's recently come up, was focused completely on SME lending. Do you think such players can actually compete with these such large incumbent banks? What do you think, Kunal?
I think they've got a role to play. I don't know whether they can compete fully with these guys. But remember that they're playing on a particular niche segment in that sense.
Right.
I think what the incumbent players can do is learn from these smaller banks that are coming onto the market to understand, okay, what's their approach to going after an SME or an SMB in that sense, and what can we do as an organization to try to learn from them in that sense. So I think they still have a part to play. Whether they can take on a bank in that sense, it's not about competition in that sense, right? I mean, if they can work collaboratively with each other, then I think it's of the greater good for the SME market in that sense. But I think from an incumbent bank perspective, players that come up, it's an opportunity for the banking world to learn from how these guys are approaching, their processes, their onboarding, the way they credit score organizations, the requirements up front, that whole process of digitization to a certain degree. And we talked about this on the last episode. The data aspect is really important. Without that, you're going to have problems. So how can traditional incumbent banks learn from these guys in terms of their approach? I think is going to be the key thing here.
Interesting to see that, because
I think they have to find mutual value in terms of incumbent bank have to find mutual value from the fintech player in terms of technology and the product models, and what they are seeing is on the huge level of data and their presence in the geographies, complex geographies like India, Indonesia, and right. So they have to see each other, like what value they bring in terms of increasing the share of the pie and itself getting the incremental size of the pie.
True.
I think traditional banks would love to get involved in the SME market. Trust me, they would. For them, it's just very difficult because of the way that they are structured, the way that they're regulated, the fact that they're very risk averse means that those types of things are barriers to a certain degree. I'm not saying that they should completely remove them. I don't think that'll ever happen, but if there's ways in which these things can be, tweaked in some way or less rigid, and these partnerships are going to be key to unlocking that.
Yeah, that's interesting because today I was reading OCBC's annual report, and what came out of that, so one of the questions for the chairman was that are you scared of digital-only banks because Singapore is granting licenses in both wholesale market and the retail market, so do you think that's going to be a challenge? And one of the things that he raised out was that we're a digitally empowered bank and we're not like a digital only bank, so we're still focusing on relationships and have that physical interface, which is a very ironical scenario in terms of when you talk about the digital propositions that Singapore is actually trying to promote, where you have no physical interface, where your relationship building is happening virtually. So I think in that sense, what I believe is while these banks are still going to be so large, these fintech players and these digital-only propositions might just steer the market in a different direction in terms of how you approach the SME customer. How do you...
They will.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly from an onboarding standpoint, if you look at it from that standpoint, the way in which you get funding hasn't really changed much per se. It's the requirements up front and the onboarding processes which are typically a problem. And not having that information, as I mentioned, the data aspects are really important. So people like OCBC and all the other kind of big corporations in Singapore, for example, they can learn, they can look at what others are doing. I might sound like a stuck record, but I think it's still a collaborative play. It's not one versus the other in that sense.
The other.
It's important to make that.
So moving on, I think that was interesting in terms of understanding the players. But when we come to understanding the industries that these guys are focusing on, so where do you think is the current market priority lying? Like what industry verticals are they focusing on with respect to serving SMEs? Shelly, would you like to go first?
So, I think it's about where is the problem statement is. So MSME who are, struggling with the cash flows, especially the working capital. So I want to on the industry per se. So we can, split that into manufacturing and service. So I think within both there is a certain sectoral which requires the immediate addressal of the working capital and which is not served by the government policies directly. So there is a liquidity release from the top monetary fiscal policies by different governments, different geographies, but those are not being built and made available by banking and NBFC traditional institutions, right? I think those been identified by this bifurcation of need-based provision. So on my view, I think SMEs who are, have different kind of requirement, that segmentation is happening in terms of the ticket size, what kind of working capital flow, like if you've seen the MSME for Indian government has identifier basis of the annual revenues, right? So that is one identifier which makes those segments. If so, as we've seen, like some ventures which are coming on, let's transport like in India. So they are specifically looking at the transportation industry, and there are other fintechs who are focusing now on very sectorial things. So that is prevailing, but I don't see that is being focused on a specific industry as a whole. So there are different players for each segment, but
And what do you think, Kunal?
Yeah, I think that more broadly speaking, in other parts of Asia Pacific, that's the thing. Every geography, every region, we're talking Asia Pacific, we're talking 11 plus regions roughly. Each region will have a certain level of where an industry is most prevalently doing well. So I think we touched upon some of this in a previous discussion, but we talked about it anyway. Typically, you'd have a business services industry, you'd have a food and restaurant industry, you'd have a retail industry, automotive and repairs and all the things that we talked about there, home care, technology and so on. These will vary dependent on where we are regionally. And if we think typically in Southeast Asia, certainly from my experiences, having lived and worked there, food and food in the restaurant business is huge, typically. And a lot of these guys are mostly independents. They're not part of a chain. So, they're not sort of tied to any major bank in that sense for funding. They're independently run and led. They struggle with getting investment to grow their business. And I know that from a Singapore standpoint as well. There's food and the restaurant industry is massive in that region, and a lot of SMEs, from that perspective, because they're independently run, family run mostly, they struggle to get funding to grow their businesses as well. Automotive repair is another big industry, and not just in not just in Asia Pacific, but globally as well. And typically these are independents as well. Yeah. So the trend here is that we're not talking about a chain of small businesses that are run and operate in different parts of the world. We're talking about local independent companies, and these guys that need money and they can't always get it. So so for me, I think if I would name a bunch of industries, I think certainly business services would be one, food and restaurant, automotive. I think would be the key ones to consider, certainly from an APAC standpoint.
I think because the country level, dependency, like we spoke about different geographies, like he mentioned, some are tourism intensive, like Indonesia is tourism intensive and India is more about the service intensive, and some geographies would be Bangladesh we have, which is, manufacturing hub. So that means that depends upon that identifier for that industry become the basis, the geography and the country we are talking about.
Right. Because it's interesting. So I was reading about one of the kind of model that my bank was adopting was that it partnered with a platform-based company, which is a logistic platform company, which onboards various logistic partners. And by understanding their their deliveries, their model, and the kind of checkouts that is happening, by understanding all those variables, they were able to extend credit lines to about 200,000 truck drivers, which are independent owners of the trucks, and they're operating and just partnered on those platforms and provide supply chain services. I think that kind of created another like a vertical, like logistics was supply chain was never focused from like providing a loan to a pickup van provider or a delivery partner. But today those chains are opening where you see like Kunal mentioned, like we have a food delivery is very prominent. And I think even the food delivery partners that they have were also independent players, and they operate in smaller groups, and which are getting consolidated, and even their data is easy to be available today in terms of the digitalization, and even they can become a growth opportunity for these players.
So I think, you are correctly mentioning. So the way this industry is heading towards, creating that ecosystem. Right. So initially and traditionally, we looked upon like financial industry is restricted to offering products of financial inclusion, right? But right now, new age fintech ecosystem is looking at creating a platform, creating an ecosystem where you can invite the players to transact, and then taking advantage of those transactions. Like you rightly said, they invited all the logistic users, and then they created data, and then they started lending. So lending has now become a secondary product. First, you are creating a complete ecosystem for those guys, those segment to transact, and then over top of that, you are extending the lending. I think that is beauty of the system. You are first solving the problem, first understanding the problem, then solving the problem, and then you are offering a solution. I think that will make a lot of sense in coming 5 to 10 years. That will the major thing. Many players have entered into e-commerce space just with the intent, extending lending in some 2 to 3 years of time. So that's how we will extending.
Great, awesome. So I think this was a very interesting discussion today. We tried to understand the marketplace. We tried to understand what kind of ecosystem do they operate in. So by last thoughts from you guys, if we had to pick up a particular segment which will be like a future growth opportunity and has not been touched by any of the market players today, whether in fintech, whether in incumbents? Where do you think that future growth opportunity lies?
That's a difficult one to answer, actually, because back to my earlier point, it already depends on the region, because every region, I say, is very different. So I can't put a broad brush to say, well, this is going to be the key industry vertical that's going to be key. I think, if we talk about, I'm going to sort of be very generalistic here, then, just to, I hope, answer the question. If we're talking specifically about Southeast Asia, I'm going to say that the food and restaurant business, for me, just based on what I've seen, and these were typically the merchants that we would target as a business when I was working out there. So providing point of sale solutions for them to transact, to be able to accept digital payments in that sense, and where they needed probably more funding in order to continue as a separate thing. I would probably just put my neck out and say, okay, that's probably an industry where there's still a lot of focus on, right? Because people will always need to eat. People will always want to eat out, irrespective if they have money or not. And there are lots of these businesses. If you compare them, across industry, there are lots of food and restaurant businesses, independent, small, big, large, doesn't matter.
And I think that's picking up more with respect to COVID. I'm sorry to cut you there, because people are not willing to go out and eat, but they still want to eat out. So they're just calling in, they're ordering in, and that's the model is picking up more in this scenario that we're currently in.
Absolutely. I think that's the mainstay. It's more prominent, I would say, in Southeast Asia in terms of the concept of people wanting to eat out more. In that sense, compare it to Europe, where it's not so active. Typically in winter, you don't tend to go out as much, whereas you don't have problems there in Southeast Asia weather-wise typically. So more and more people want to go out and eat. So these restaurants, they want to grow their businesses typically. They don't want, and they've got the footfall there as well. If they can't grow, then that's going to be an impediment to them. So I feel that based on my experiences and what I've seen, I would say that the food and restaurant business certainly would be a key one to look into.
Key one. Awesome. What do you think, Shelly?
I think I look at it like we have a large segment of unorganized sector. So it's not the main industry, but ancillary industry, which is, supporting in the other way on the rest of the, manufacturing units are operating, especially if in India kind of geography, even we may pick Bangladesh as well, or maybe followed by Indonesia. So there are a lot of, I think 40 to 50% as the unorganized sector, which are still not covered by, formal financing. I think that is the larger problem set which needs addressal in terms of, because they are the, most impacted by the pandemic, if we see. And that sector is already not, been eyed upon. It is being eyed upon as of now, but it's not mature as such. So that has to be started with the first digital literacy like we discussed. And then if that becomes a success with the, initiative from the telecom partners and from the e-commerce sector. So even supported by government policies, I think that segment is a very large and a lucrative one on the business proposition as well.
Great. Awesome. So thank you guys. This was really good. I think we'll touch back again with a lot more insights from the two of you. It was lovely to have you today. Thank you guys.
Thanks
you very much.
See you.
Take care.